If you want to start the recording. There we go. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for hanging in with us for the last session on the last day of the summit. Hasn't it been a great program? Yeah. I know this is Dan Feinberg's favorite day of the summit, so I hope our last session doesn't disappoint, but I know we've had lots of conversations over the last couple of days, and I think it is appropriately named Hot Topics in FERPA. So I'm pleased to be here with a few colleagues of mine. Let me see if I can get to the slide. Their bios are on the website, or there are links to bios. And so what we wanted to do here today is just kind of share some information and allow for some of the questions that have been coming forward over the last really year since we've been in the midst of this implementation of our DLE around some of the FERPA issues that are coming up in the digital environment. And so we thought it might be helpful to hear about it from the national perspective, from the SUNY perspective, and then from a campus perspective. So I'm really thrilled that we have with us Scott Goldschmidt, who is a partner at the law firm Thompson and Coburn, and also Adam Haney, who is our Assistant Deputy General Counsel in SUNY's Office of General Counsel, and then Karen Chico Hurst, who is the University Registrar at the University at Albany. So I just want to say thank you to all of them for joining us today. We've had some, as we've convened ourselves to prepare for this, we feel like there's a lot to share. We know there's a lot of questions, so we want to be able to try and address as many of those as possible. I should also mention that in prep for this session, we sent out a question to the a Google Doc to the SUNY community and invited you all to send in your questions. So those questions that came in have been shared with the panelists, and they're going to try to address them. So, all right. Without further ado, I do want to start with conditions of use and disclaimer. Which I did not produce. Thank you to Adam and Scott for producing this. And I will read it so that anybody, so that you can hear it verbally. Please note that the purpose of this presentation is to provide news and information, and all the content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. The transmission of information from this presentation does not establish an attorney-client relationship with the participant. The participant should not act on the information contained in this presentation or any accompanying materials without first consulting your campus counsel and/or other retained legal counsel. And if you desire legal advice for any particular situation, you should consult a licensed attorney. So everybody has, been informed of what we're planning to do here, so that you know. Thank you. All right, so we are going to start with a FERPA refresh that Scott is going to walk us through. So Scott, go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks, Kim. And thank you to everyone. It's really been a pleasure to sit and talk with everyone here and learn more about.
We can't hear online.
Is this on?
Thank you, Jen.
How about now?
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
Much better.
See, technology, everyone.
Take two.
Well, yes. Well, thank you guys for the invite. It's really been a pleasure to talk with everyone, to listen to the sessions, to kind of get a sense of what you guys are dealing with. Hopefully that disclaimer wasn't too legalistic. We really are here to help. Just want to be clear that we are not your lawyers. Still happy to talk about any hypothetical situations that might come up. So first thing to do is to let everyone know one of the biggest issues or questions in my practice, and I'm a higher ed attorney, is FERPA. So any confusion or things that are unclear is totally normal. We get these questions all the time. So this is great. And we appreciate the opportunity to come and make sure we're all on the same page. The first thing we want to do is level set and just make sure everyone has a basic understanding of what FERPA is and really what FERPA isn't. And this is going to be a 5-minute introduction. This is going to be the quickest FERPA refresh that probably you've ever had. So I'm sure your campuses all have longer trainings, but for the purposes of this session, here are the high points. So FERPA is a federal law, a privacy law that protects student education records. Okay, education records is the key piece of this definition. That's why it's in red. This is what FERPA is about. I think when people hear privacy laws in general, they think complex, they think kind of there's lists of things that need to be covered. Here, the main thing to know are education records. So FERPA, eligible students in FERPA have the right to control disclosure, which is what we're going to be talking about most. They have an inspect and review right, and they can seek amendments and file complaints. The next slide, please. So if we've established education records are the key to FERPA, it's important to understand what education records are. Every term in red here, we're going to define further, but education records are records directly related to a student and maintained by the institution. It's important to note that education records can appear in any form, printed, handwritten copies, for our purposes electronic, and can be found in multiple locations. All right. So into the meat of it, what is a record? A record is any information, right? Super broad. Doesn't include your personal knowledge, but a record could really mean any piece of information recorded in any way. A record is directly related to a student if it contains personally identifiable information about this student. Now, I won't bore you with how we got these definitions. Some are from the regulation itself. Some are from guidance from FCPO, the Family Compliance, now the Student Privacy Protection Office. But for our purposes, we're talking about records. If they're directly related, it means it has personally identifiable information about a student. Personally identifiable information is information that would enable a reasonable person with no personal knowledge to identify the student. So that includes names, addresses, social security numbers, identifiers, transcripts, kind of all the things that you might think would be associated with the student. Those could be personally identifiable information. Maintain is a key element of the definition of a student education record. It is not defined in the statute. Now, I have certain thoughts of what maintained might be, and I'm sure Adam does as well. But for our purposes, we don't have a clear definition. So really anything that could possibly be in the control or purview of someone at the institution could be maintained. And I think that's a pretty conservative and reasonable way to look at this definition. So once we have our education records, there are disclosure requirements and preventions on disclosure. So if you have an education record, you can disclose them to anyone. You cannot disclose them, to anyone other than the relevant student unless written consent is provided. And there's a statutory regulatory key of what includes written consent, or one of 16 exceptions apply. For our purposes today, the two most relevant would be the directory information exemption and the school official exemption. Can I, just a show of hands, how many people are familiar with directory information and school official exemptions? All right, great. So directory information is information that's part of just information, if disclosed, would not cause a particular harm to a student. So those are things like name, email address, photo, etc. That could be directory information. A school official exemption is how a lot of you get your information. So actually, do you mind going to the next slide?
Yeah.
So you can disclose PII to school officials when they have a legitimate education interest. And this is an exception to FERPA's disclosure requirements. And it allows information to be shared across an educational campus. So a school official, the test is if they have this legitimate educational interest, and that's if they need the information to fulfill their responsibilities to the institution. So this could include your deans or your success coaches or kind of people within your campus. It could also include your vendors and your contractors. Another show of hands, does everyone realize that your institution files an annual FERPA notice? All right, so your institution files an annual FERPA notice, and it should be available on your website, and it includes important things. I'd encourage you guys to take a look. I'm sure your campus and lawyers spend some time putting it together, and it includes what your campus designates as directory information. That's included in that notice as well. Sorry, if I'm going too fast, let me know. I just want to try and get through this briskly.
And I'm sorry, we are sharing the slides, so you will have them.
Perfect. And last piece, especially for all the the vendors and the software providers and the learning management systems, they could kind of have access to FERPA under the school official exemption if they have this legitimate education interest, but there are certain conditions. So these vendors would have to perform a service or function which the school would normally perform. They'd have to be under the control of the institution with regards to the records. They'd have to be subject to FERPA's requirements, and then have to use the information only for the purposes that it's disclosed. These, I assume, will all be in your vendor contracts, not something for you to be concerned about, but just to be aware of. All right, so now everyone's FERPA experts? All right. All right, how am I doing? Okay, good. And happy to go back, answer any questions, et cetera. I know I went through that super fast, but we have a lot to deal with. So from a national perspective, we're at a digital learning environment conference. We're dealing with a law passed in the 70s with a lot of 1980s regulations. So as you can tell, and it's kind of funny, in preparing for this, I went back and read some of those regulations. They kind of talk about the new emerging kind of piece of technology and the internet. And I know SUNY was way ahead of that, but in the 2008 kind of regulations, they allude to this concept, but kind of only give it short shrift. The last major significant updates to these regulations happened in 2011. And a lot happened since 2011. So safe to say the law might not have been kept up with the times specifically for our purposes here. So SPPO, so that is the organization or the office within the Department of Education, the Student Privacy Protection Office, that's been trying that is charged with administering the FERPA regulations, charged with receiving complaints. They've been trying to fill in the gaps a little bit. So in 2004, there's guidance, it's in your materials, that the Privacy Office put out about best practices for assuring student privacy online. In 2010, they put out a lot of guidance specific to COVID, but they're trying to work with this old framework. They're doing the best they can, working within these parameters, and it's to varying success. And I think part of the reason there might be some confusion is that we have all these questions here today. So common to have a lot of depends, common to have a lot of gray areas. A lot of people are trying to work to make these regulations fit in the new normal. New regulations. So I know in the morning presentation talked about kind of being a data nerd. If you want to talk about kind of regulatory nerd and talk about the regulatory process, I'm happy to do that if you have any questions on that piece. But there is a potential for new regulations on the horizon. In our prep, Adam was saying that we've heard this before. This might be a Charlie Brown in the football situation. But theoretically, the department has put on their White House website, we're expecting new FERPA regulations to be published potentially next month. And so what that means is maybe they'll address some of these issues that we're going to talk about. Maybe they'll provide clarity. It also gives everyone in this room an option to comment. And comments, I think, are really valuable with regard to, because you guys are the ones living this and providing that experience, and maybe there's room for improvement. But just so you guys are aware, FERPA could be changing, and everything we're saying might be moot in a month. Hopefully not. Other national issues, data privacy and security is the big thing at the department. So there's been a lot of guidance, a lot more than kind of in sessions about how to protect data privacy, how to protect security, how to protect financial aid information. Vendor contracts, again, maybe not your purview. They're a significant part of this compliance effort. Also wanted to call out Graham-Leach-Bliley, which maybe you guys don't need to be aware of, but it's a law that's been on the books for about 20 years. There was a new safeguards rule put into place about 2 years ago, but it's kind of resuscitated in the higher ed space because the department's going to now be auditing compliance with Graham-Leach-Bliley. For our purposes, the privacy rules, so you comply by Graham-Leach-Bliley, it's privacy rules by complying with FERPA. So it's not only the regulations, it's also complying with this other federal statute that has actually significant penalties monetarily to the FTC and also potentially to the department. Oh, and last, just really quick common issues that maybe to address. Remember, we're talking about education records here. A lot of questions I get and we can just kind of take out of the FERPA landscape, because FERPA just might not apply. If we're really not talking about education records at all here, FERPA wouldn't have any bearing. With directory information, so that name, rank, and serial number piece, there is an opt-out provision. So you can go to the registrar and say, I want my directory information to be publicly shared, and the institution has to honor that, except you cannot use that opt-out to prevent disclosures identifying you within your name within your course. So students tried to be anonymous in online courses and say, I've opted out of direct information, I want to be anonymous. The department actually put this in regulation and said, you cannot rely on that FERPA opt-out, you cannot be anonymous. And then for one-off situations, I think we'll talk about more, but consent's an option, having policies always good ideas. And with that, I'll turn it over to Adam.
Thank you, Scott. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. So it would be helpful for me, just in terms of how much we're going to dive in here. How many people actually work at a state operated SUNY campus? Okay. So many of you. How many are community colleges? Okay. How many are private institutions? Couple. Okay.
And we have more online.
And more online.
Yep.
Okay. So we have quite a mix.
Yep.
I wanted to sort of give everybody I would say a base point. So if you want to go, thank you, to the next slide. So this is hopefully you can see this. I know some of you are in the back of the room. So the SUNY system itself is actually a system of 64 campuses that all bear in some format the State University of New York name, but are not actually all part of the same legal entity. So we have 29 what we call state operated campuses, which are actually a legal component of the educational corporation known as the State University of New York. We have 30 community colleges. Those are actually municipal entities that are owned and operated by their local sponsors. So that could be, for the example, for FIT, it's the city of New York, or for Hudson Valley Community College, it's their surrounding communities, or excuse me, counties. And for statutory colleges, those are actually both at Alfred University as well as at Cornell. And so those employees are actually college employees for Cornell. And we have some oversight of them through the process with the Board of Trustees. But the reason I'm pointing it out to you is because from a FERPA perspective, we're not all part of the same legal entity, which will make sense in just a moment. This map on the right-hand side is like where they're all physically located. Technically speaking, we're the most comprehensive system in the country, primarily only because California is separated into 3 separate systems. But we still like to use that to pat ourselves on the back. The statistic is that something like 94% of New Yorkers are within like 15 to 20 minutes of a SUNY campus. So as you can see, they're literally all over the state. Next slide, please. So this is, of course, the SUNY system administration. That's where Kim and I both sit amongst some other people in the room. But our purpose is actually to sort of facilitate the entire system-wide administration. So that includes all of the 64 campuses that we mentioned to you before. And so we support the Board of Trustees as well as the other components that exist at system. And then we have IT services that, of course, connect to all the different campuses. There's system-wide institutional research. We do maintain some system level records. We do many procurements for all of our campuses, and of course, system-wide initiatives. This building sits in Albany, New York. And so we call it like a castle. But if you're on the first floor, it looks a little bit like Hogwarts, but the rest of it's very office building-like.
Yeah.
So just stay on the first floor if you want the cool part of it. And so why does this matter? So next slide, please. So system-wide compliance with FERPA, of course, as one legal entity, which includes system administration and all 29 campuses, we of course, put into place policies and procedures at the system level that both support and reinforce FERPA, student privacy, and data security. FERPA is not the only privacy law, of course, that we have to deal with. New York State has a law we call it the PPPL, but it stands for the Personal Privacy Protection Law that applies to us because we're a state entity. That also will deal with things that happen before a student actually becomes covered by FERPA, but also includes employees and other people that were maybe connected to the institution. What I wanted to sort of provide to you, and again, we're sharing the slides, our FERPA, we call it a requirement because it's not technically a policy or procedure on its own. Of course, reinforces the things that Scott mentioned before about making sure that every campus is actually issuing their annual notice of rights under FERPA. And it sort of gives some opportunities as to where those things can be posted. So the campuses themselves can decide what makes sense for their particular bodies, but it can include an email, a campus handbook. It could be the course catalog. Some people do multiple emails. Some people send letters. It really is whatever the campus may deem appropriate. The secondary part of our requirement, as you'll see at the bottom, is that SUNY system as a whole actually used the school official exception to be able to collect information directly from the campuses. So you'll see that, like, if one of the board of trustees members calls the campus and says they want to collect information about a student, they are authorized to do that under the school official policy, as well as if like Kim, for example, calls and asks for information for SUNY online purposes, she would be able to collect that because she's employed by university's system administration. And so we get a lot of questions on that in our office about like how we can sort of collect information from system to be able to support the students as a whole. But that's the way that we do it at the first level, so that people are all aware that that's the way that it works. And so with the school official exception, as Scott mentioned, it only provides for the initial disclosure. So every time that Kim wants to share information with someone else, she needs to identify what exception may apply. And so if she's going to send something to me, I could also be a school official. So she could say, oh, that exception will apply, so I can send things to Adam, or it could be the litigation exception or whatever may exist. But that's critical when you sort of work through your processes, that if you get information through the school official exception, you have a prohibition on redisclosure, unless you can also hit another exception, whether that be school official or something else. And so we always have to remind university police, for example, that if they get information from the campus, they receive that as part of a school official exception. And so then they can't share that with like the district attorney's office or police that are outside of the institution, because the school official exception wouldn't necessarily apply in the same manner. So you sort of have to think about it as a step process of how you get from wherever you may sit to whoever you ultimately want the information to go to. Does that make sense? You see some nods in the room. Okay, so next slide. So for those of you that are visual learners, thought this would be helpful for you to see. And so, as I said to you before, so like while a campus can share information with system and system can share back with the campus, two SUNY campuses cannot automatically share FERPA protected information with each other. So you'll see here that I borrowed some of the logos from our campuses. So Potsdam can share with SUNY system administration and back and forth, but Cobleskill can't share with New Paltz automatically unless there's some sort of an exception that otherwise applies. And why is this important? So next slide. About 6 years ago, we had this grand idea. It's called reverse transfer, that some of you probably recall if you were here at the time, where we wanted to be able to support students that may have started their work at a community college and then decided to transfer to a four-year institution. As you know, for those of you at community colleges, there's a lower number of credits in order to get your associate's degree. And so we wanted to be able to support students to then be able to get their associate's degree from wherever they may have started from at the community college, but then also continue their work at the four-year school. So ultimately leave with both an associate's and a bachelor's degree. Great idea in theory. And we were able to put it into place, but with a caveat. And so back in 2016, I think it was, we didn't ask for it, but we were engaged with the Department of Education's Family Policy Compliance Office, the FPCO, as Scott mentioned before, who sent us a very detailed letter that indicated that even though we function as one system for FERPA purposes, that we do not function as one system. And so if you want to share between Potsdam and New Paltz, you have to meet all the other requirements as if you were sharing between Potsdam and Syracuse University. And so it's nonsensical to some degree. And I think we tried to sort of argue that this makes sense and here's why, but we lost the argument. So we ended up still doing the reverse transfer process, but we get consent from the student. And so that's the compliance piece that we meet in order to be able to can actually do that work. And I'm sure Karen may talk about this briefly in her presentation. But I wanted to give you the sense of like what the actual letter said as to why they decided that we actually don't exist as one FERPA entity. And so they looked at the fact that students cannot easily transfer seamlessly between SUNY campuses. They have to apply the entire process. Faculty are hired and appointed at individual campuses as opposed to as a SUNY faculty member. Same thing with degrees, that you get your degree from SUNY Albany or SUNY Poly. It's not from the State University of New York. The FERPA authorization, or excuse me, annual notification, the campuses themselves do it, and they don't do the same language, and it's not all from the State University of New York. And the same thing at the bottom, that you're admitted and graduated to a campus as opposed to the State University of New York. So that's one of the, I think, biggest challenges that we've had with the DLE implementation, is that in our minds, we're like, oh, people can just easily take classes from one campus to the other. We're all SUNY institutions, so what's the problem? So we have this grand letter that we actually have to work through and keep in the back of our minds as to how do we set this up in a way that works for everybody and keeps us in compliance with our current FERPA requirements. I think our hope, as Scott mentioned, is that some of the authorization / compliance language that will come out with these new regulations will update the times to be more applicable to the current state of technology and the way that people are doing a lot more online education than they did 10 years ago, even 2 years ago, before that, or three, before the pandemic. But that's what we're stuck with. We have a law that's unfortunately out of date, and regulations that are also out of date, that don't sort of keep up with how we do things. And so us poor attorneys are always like, what about FERPA? You have to remember FERPA. Kim's like, I hate FERPA.
I never said that.
That's true. She never said that. She just gives me the eye. And so, but this is the, we sort of have to work through, and the sort of, unfortunately, we're not in the gray area anymore because we received this letter.
Yeah.
And so that is my thoughts on that. And I will pass it over to Karen for the campus perspective.
Thank you, Adam. And thank
Next
you,
slide.
Scott. I'm getting there.
Okay.
It's not cooperating with me. There we go. Okay, Karen, over to you.
Oh, hey there, Adam. I just found actually the letter you were referring to, January 20, 2016, letter to SUNY on
Yeah.
reverse transfer.
You can share with everyone if you'd like
I
to.
can-
read it,
I
but
can
it's
actually
publicly
give-
available.
Give it to Kim.
Just search for FERPA SUNY DOE and it'll be one of the first
There
hits.
you go.
All right, so you obviously can hear me, yes? Can the
Yes.
audience hear me? Okay, great. So again, I'm Karen Chico Hurst. I'm the University Registrar at the University at Albany, coming to you today virtually, and I'm thrilled to be here. And want to thank Kim for inviting me to talk to you about the campus perspective when it comes to FERPA, namely the primary issues that we have to account for and deal with on a daily basis to ensure compliance. So my presentation is going to go over some of the same items that Scott and Adam covered, and I'm going to put those into some real life situations and give you some examples of topics that a campus might have to deal with, as well as some general guidance that we give our employees. But first, since Kim loves, I just heard Kim loves FERPA, I think that's what I heard. Let's do a knock knock joke. So knock knock.
Who's there?
There. FERPA.
FERPA who?
Sorry, I can't tell you that. All right, so the role of the registrar's office is to make sure that our campuses are compliant. Since we're the unit responsible for the maintenance of academic and education records, we have to ensure that we're up to date on the most critical FERPA guidance issued by the Department of Education. We also follow guidance from the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, also known as ACRO. So as registrars, we have a commitment to campus compliance with FERPA, and this means we're at the table in defining our campus definition of directory information, which Scott and Adam spoke about, distributing the university's related policy and guidance on FERPA, and notifying students of the rights that Scott covered, the right to inspect, review, request an amendment, provide written consent, and file a complaint. Now, listen, we don't ever want anyone to file a complaint. So that's why we're here today. We also, registrars also offer training sessions on FERPA to faculty and staff. And unfortunately, we have to be at the table when there's a data breach. So let's talk about privacy and data security. Since this is the SUNY Online Summit, it's important to note that the same principles of access, confidentiality, and responsibility still apply like they did when we were maintaining records via paper and putting them in folders, and classes were traditionally in person. So this data privacy and security also extends to email, online classes, videos, and the use of third-party software integrations. It's important to remember, if we're not compliant, the Department of Education will issue a notice, Adam just spoke about it, and that they can also withhold federal funding from our campuses. So just one more thing about data and privacy security. In today's world, with so much being online, it's often difficult to separate student privacy from data security. So I just want to leave you with, it's not a matter of if we're going to have a breach, it's a matter of when. So there are a lot of little things that we can all do on our campuses to make sure that we are compliant. So some Compliance and best practices for protecting student privacy when using online applications and resources. The first one I'll start with is training. It is critical, especially for faculty. Faculty are focused on teaching. They're eager to share their knowledge with their students, but there are some things that they need to be aware of, particularly in the online environment. And as both Adam and Scott said, FERPA has not caught up in this environment. The Department of Education and the Privacy Technical Assistance Center, referred to as PTAC, offer resources for campuses to ensure they learn about data privacy, confidentiality, and security practices related to student data. There's a lot of really good videos out on the Department of Ed website, and I put those at the end of this slide deck as references. I can also provide Kim at the end a very good FERPA question and answer document that we use in all our trainings on campus. So a great way to ensure compliance when using online applications is by using the tools that are licensed by your college or university. And Scott and Adam alluded to that a little bit as well. When you have an official contract with a vendor, there's often a FERPA addendum that recognizes the vendor as a school official, which Scott covered when he mentioned disclosures and school official exceptions. When we outsource our services or functions under contract, FERPA will permit the disclosure of PII, which in the contract covers performing an institutional service, determining whether the vendor meets the criteria set forth in the school's annual notification or SUNY's annual notification, that they're under our direct control. And as Adam said, that they use education records only for the purpose that they are authorized to do so, and they don't share the data with a third party without student written consent. So let's back up a little bit. We used to have a lot of paper books, photocopies, document cameras, and PowerPoint slides. A lot of those are a thing of the past. They've been replaced with on-demand or online delivery and a wealth of other interactive technologies that enhance the classroom experience. Lessons are planned, lectures are recorded, students are collaborating, posting on discussion boards, and sharing materials. This is where we have to be extremely mindful of the definition that Scott covered, namely what constitutes an education record, which must be protected by FERPA and can only be disclosed with written consent of the student. So I'm going to share some scenarios with you that will hopefully help you in your work as you move forward. These are based on questions that we get throughout the year. So a faculty member asks, I have found an online platform that my students can use to access course materials. The vendor requires that I provide them with a list of student names, date of birth, and email addresses in order to provide the students with login and account information. Can I provide these details? Anyone out there?
We got a lot of no's.
Okay. So my answer is has a couple prongs in it. My first question would be, does the university license this product? And if not, the only way you can provide that information requested is with the written consent of students. And even then, I caution folks that the services that are not licensed by the university may not have the proper protocols in place to protect the privacy of our students. Additionally, if you have a contract with the vendor or you're just negotiating a contract with the vendor, you should always have your IT department in the loop and check to make sure that they are able to help you with a secure data integration. A faculty member asks, can I have students watch video tutorials or complete interactive exercises offered by a provider that does not require individual students to log in? And the answer to that is yes, because no PII from the student's education record is being disclosed or maintained by the provider. So back to Blackboard and Brightspace. A faculty member asks, are those platforms FERPA compliant? So yes, they're licensed by SUNY, and this qualifies them to provide services under the school official exception because they provide an institutional service or function for which SUNY or our campuses would otherwise use its own employees to deliver. So we often get a couple of other questions. Can non-students observe a virtual lesson? And I would say throw the classroom back in there as well. The answer is the same. assuming that during the lesson, PII or personally identifiable information from student education records will not be disclosed, FERPA would not prohibit a non-student from observing the lesson. However, this type of participation should not be encouraged in the event that PII were to be disclosed. So we get a lot of questions about videos, and do recordings qualify as an education record? You heard that term before. And so, yes, they can if they directly relate to a student and are maintained by your school. So hopefully these scenarios give you some food for thought. I'm going to wrap it up by covering some basics on security and your role in protecting student education records. So we have physical and electronic security. Our desktops need to remain clean. If you are working on something that has student personally identifiable information on it, and you're going to get up from your desk or walk away with your desk, the best practice is to put that in a drawer, lock it so no one else can be looking at it. This is especially important if you're meeting with a student and you have, say, I'm meeting with a student and I have Scott's papers on my desk, and they have some of his PII on them, namely grades. And Adam walks in and he can see that. So just to give you some basics, you just want to make sure that you don't leave that stuff out in the open. Laptops and portable devices do not ever store PII on flash drives, hard drives, etc. But use network drives protected by your college or university's resources, and be sure to use timed logouts on your desktop or any other things you are accessing, any other platforms that you are accessing to manage student data. And this applies to in the office and at home. So I know a lot of us are telecommuting and we might have stuff on our desk at home, but your desk at home is just as insecure as your desk in the office, because you probably live with someone and they can walk by and they can see the student data. So your office on campus or off campus, just be mindful of others around you who may be looking to access student PII in a harmful way. Electronic security, use wireless networks that are secure. I know a lot of people who are doing their work while they dropped their kids off at some sports place, and they want to catch up on some work. But if you're on a guest Wi-Fi, it's obviously less secure than if you were using something that your campus provides for you. Email, it's wretched, right? Wretched, not only because it consumes our lives, but it's ripe with opportunities to cause a breach. You can send the wrong email to the wrong person. You can copy the wrong person. So I really need to stress to you all the importance of being careful with email. Another best practice is to only email PII via an encrypted page using your school's email. So in my case, at albany.edu. Don't use Gmail, don't use Slack to convey student personally identifiable information. When you're working from home, make sure you have a quiet and secure environment. And I always recommend that you do not use your personal devices when you are looking at student information. If you must use it, make sure you employ all of the practices that I mentioned earlier, timed out logouts and passwords are always a best practice. So to wrap it all up, your role, part of what you do each and every day, whether you teach or work in an administrative office or advise students, is records management. So please be a good data steward. It's everybody's job to protect student data. We don't want anybody to be the weak link. And I'll leave you with, don't be afraid to ask your registrar for help or guidance. That's what we're here for. It's often that the scenarios are very situational, related just to your question at hand, and we're always happy to answer those or get in touch with like Adam at SUNY or our campus attorneys as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Karen, very much. And now we wanted to go to questions. And I just want to mention that Alex has already shared some resources or posted some resources on the Summit website, right? We have some additional resources that Karen mentioned that we'll add because I think these are additional, but I think we want to get out of the PowerPoint and go to questions now, and let me see if I can, do we want to put everybody up there, Alex? Is that what we want to do? Stop sharing. Yeah, okay. Unpin Karen. We're unpinning you, Karen.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay. All right. And I'm going to come up here.
Oh, he took our mic. You might want to stay down there.
I'll stay here. It's fine. Yeah. And I think we'll kind of toggle back and forth between online folks and the room, if that's okay. You can't. Yeah. So, but let's go ahead and start with Dean.
Thank you. Dean Dyer, Jefferson Community College. It's something that had never occurred to me before. Our university doesn't have, or our campus doesn't have an agreement with, say, Pearson or Cengage or anyone, right? That's kind of an individual faculty deciding to use that publisher's materials. Mm-hmm. Or does setting up the LTI integration in the DLE count as that contracted use?
That's a hypothetical question, right?
Absolutely.
This is all hypothetical. As you said.
You want to take that?
I'm not sure I understand the specific databases. So
and I'll just clarify that just because we're doing the integrations into the LMS at the system level doesn't necessarily mean that we have a contract.
That sounds like one you might want to talk to your own attorneys about, just because it sounds very case specific. But generally speaking, what I would say when it comes to those sorts of integrations is that it would be sort of a combined effort, is that if there isn't otherwise an integration that comes with the DLE itself, that's something that your campus would be responsible for, to make sure if there's any sort of intellectual property issues that might come up with it, or if there's going to be information shared. It's likely going to probably be in some sort of arrangement. You might just not be aware of it. So I would check with your local procurement folks and your attorneys and see if there's anything that already sort of takes care of that issue for you.
Yeah, I'd be really surprised if there was no contract just from your vendors. They seem like pretty sophisticated players, hypothetically. So I would think they might have, you want to be careful. We get a lot of vendors with click-through agreements, and people just like click through and say, I accept. And that is a contract. And you could be accepting very not great terms for your campus. So be careful when you're doing that. There's no legal requirement to have this FERPA addendum that we talked about, all three of us. It is highly, highly, highly recommended, just for all the reasons, and really just to set expectations both with you and your vendors. So this is hypothetically great, and come back and check your agreements and do what needs to be done. We want to figure this out now versus later.
Yeah. Do we have someone online? Oh yeah.
Sure. Just wanted to pass on one of the online questions, was about course merges, right? And if a faculty member is choosing to merge two or more of their courses, is that a violation of FERPA?
So yeah, we actually talked about this in the audience a little earlier. So from the grand kind of perspective, remember here we're talking about education records, right? That was my original kind of thesis at the beginning. If there's no education records being shared as part of this course merge, there might be no FERPA issue. I've dealt with people in terms of having campus shells and having just general materials on there. And as long as each enrolled course is separate and students kind of can't mix and match and see other people's grades and assignments and everything like that, it could be potentially possible under FERPA. But as we discussed with a few of your colleagues earlier, that might not be possible based on your specific database and LMS. So it is possible to merge a course. It's possible to do a lot of things. It's one of those it depends annoying lawyer answers, I know, but just make sure that if you're doing that, understanding what your FERPA obligations are, and that your actual software can allow for this.
Can I add to that?
Yep, please.
So the answer to that question is it could be. It just depends on how your particular situation is set up. And so like you would need to be able to sort of work through the actual just like I said to you before, what exceptions would apply. If there's any sort of consent module, so like campuses could say, you know, putting in advance, whether it be in the course catalog or something, that these are intended to be merged courses, to sort of give students a heads up in advance. You could ask specifically for consent from the students to be able to merge the course. So there's ways that I think you can work closely to find a way that is FERPA compliant, but it isn't automatically going to be a situation that you can just dump them together with no preparation. That's going to be a potential FERPA breach. But again, whatever your software and how that's set up is going to dictate whether that actually is a FERPA breach or not.
I want to ask Karen if you want to comment on this, because I know you get this question.
We get this question a lot. Thanks. And I agree with what Scott and Adam have said. I want to take it a little bit further, because if you combine, let's say 5 sections of Psych 101, all the same instructor, but different times in different places, that's different than a cross-listed course. So the issue here is not with cross-listed or shared courses that get attached in the background in the SIS. The issue that we worry about the most is like this one with the Psych 101 example. And I would just like to put something out there to you. Before we were in this online environment, we might have had 6 sections of Psych 101. And if you ever get a complaint or need to move a student, and our specific example was a violation of Title IX, which is sexual assault. The individual wanted to move out of the course they were in and choose a different one. And when they're all combined, there's no way for that student to move out. They're still going to be seen by the people in the other class, and may end up having to drop that course and not complete on time because of a particular situation. So we want to make sure that we are, and it's not just sexual assault. It's, you know, maybe there was some issue within the classroom, individuals being disruptive, whatever scenario you can come up with. Once you've combined those, you can't really uncombine them. And then you have left a student out because they have a particular situation. So I just want you to be mindful of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just asking to keep following up on this issue, because this is like the reason I was excited for this session. When you say it depends, I'm very curious on what kind of things and what scenarios it would depend on. For example, is it the class list and just being able to see the directory information that would be an it depends, that I'm in section 1, but I can see the class list of section 2? Or is it the actual discussion boards and materials that it depends on? And I want to understand a little bit more deeply when that directory information starts not being directory information because it's attached to an enrollment.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Okay. So if you remember from my presentation, so directory information, so hopefully everyone remembers, is just the basic information that the institution is designated that wouldn't be harmful to disclose. The exception to this, it's a narrow exception in the regulation that I cited, is you can't opt out of directory information for a class that you're enrolled in. So to the extent that you add more than one class enrollments in the process, that exception might not apply. And if there are people that opt out of directory information kind of as part of your Psych 101, that would not be permitted to view even the class list under FERPA. So I think it's both the class list, most likely, and certainly discussion boards and kind of other information that you might be sharing as part of the learning.
And I'll also piggyback on that. The classes that I am enrolled in are not directory information.
Right.
And I just want to comment further too, Adam, hold on a second.
Yep.
The campus's definition of directory information can vary. Our campus does not list email addresses as directory information. So in my example, I specifically said name, date of birth, and email address. Whereas name and email address might be directory information at one school, it's not at mine. And date of birth is never directory information.
And I would say that this is another example of sort of the fact that FERPA has not caught up with the times. And so like, if you think about like a physical class where everybody sort of comes together at Tuesdays at 2 p.m. and you see each other as part of the class, that's different than a completely online class where you wouldn't necessarily have to see and engage with other people in the course. And so to Scott's point is that if you're in, section 1 of Psych 101, and that's the class that you enroll in, unless you can find a way to merge it that would be FERPA compliant, if you're in section 6 that you're enrolled in, like that's what you chose to enroll in. So if you merge them, that's the problem that sort of gets triggered, is that because you enrolled for a specific section as opposed to the course, that can be complicated. Some of the workarounds that you certainly should talk to your registrars and campus counsel or whoever may be your attorneys for your campus could be whether or not like some, and I don't know if DLE does this or not, or Blackboard, but you can sort of create a master class that then sort of trickles down to what we would call child classes or smaller sections that then like the faculty member can post in the master class. So then it trickles down to the other sections. They don't get, so the sections can't talk to each other, right? But they still, as the faculty member can then just distribute that separately. So they only have to do it once as opposed to 6 times. And then they would just be able to communicate within their own section. And so like some technologies can do that, for example. And so there's some workarounds for sure. I don't want people to think like this can never, ever happen. It's just, it can be complicated, especially with the current regulations in which we find ourselves. And again, we're hoping that will be clarified in the future. But that's something that's very case specific.
Yeah. And just quickly, if the new regulations come out and this is not clarified, and this is really important to you guys, comment on it.
Yeah.
It's not hard. You just go to regulations.gov, tell them how it's going to hurt or affect students and yourself. I think that has a lot of traction with the department. That's their goal. They don't know this, all the kind of ins and outs of registrar and course registrations. So I highly encourage that.
Thank you. Doris, I see that you have your hand up. Do you want to ask your question verbally?
Sure. It was more of a comment, which was I've been trying to test where the potential FERPA violations could be within Brightspace. I've been doing it in the test environment. I finally got it set up in our production environment because there's some small differences. And hopefully next week I'll be able to finish that up and just kind of share a list with campuses of here's the places where if you merge sections, faculty have to be careful. Some campuses I've seen in the chat and I've just heard are just turning off certain tools like discussions, but it is possible to have a merged course and have the 2 sections have separate conversations. So like I said, I'm just trying to go really methodically through everything that I can see and say, this could be a problem, this could be a problem, that could be a problem, and as long as you train your faculty to not do those things or just take those tools away, then you should be able to merge it. But if FERPA is changing next month, who knows? So in any case, I've been saying this for a while. I promise someday I will give you my rundown on like, here's where I see problems being and the workarounds so that we can focus on some training.
Thank you so much, Doris. That's excellent. Great. Okay.
And to be clear, these are going to be proposed regulations. And so you'll be able to comment on them. They're not going to go into effect immediately.
Yeah.
So even if it is great and it clarifies all these issues, it's not going to take effect in April. They usually will have a comment period of at least 180 days, sometimes less, 80 days. It sort of depends. You'll see when those come out and then they'll give you an actual implementation date. And so like, while we're all excited for potential clarity, it's not going to happen immediately.
I do have a related question, which is, when faculty come to me and they're like, I want to merge my courses and what's the big deal with FERPA? There's a misconception on the faculty side, and my common thing is they're like, well, I have students from my Monday class come to my Wednesday class when they miss the Monday class. What's the big deal if I have classes merged? So is it an issue if a student from Monday comes to Wednesday's class? Just so I can answer that question and tell them why they shouldn't be doing this in Brightspace either.
I think Karen wants to comment on this.
I was just going to say it is the same scenario, unfortunately. And I want to encourage all of you to work with your registrars on these issues, because what we will do is get you the best guidance we can. And I understand that it is so much better for a faculty member to be combining those 6 classes with different class sections. So we just need to find a way to do it in a FERPA compliant manner.
So Karen, I understand that it's a problem, but and I have talked to my registrar, and what I do say to faculty is, I think you want to talk to the registrar about why you think that's not a problem. Why isn't that a problem to have Wednesday, Monday come to Wednesday's class? Because they see each other in the hall. What's the big deal?
The hall is different. It's not the class that they've registered for. And FERPA, FERPA regulations state that classes are not directory information. So think about the parent that calls your school and wants to know, is Sally Q in class, whatever right now? Could you go look and make sure they're sitting in class? We can't give out that information. Once this, and I'm not sure if Scott covered this, but once a student is enrolled at a campus, regardless of age, FERPA applies.
Okay, we have a question in the room. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, Katrina Searing from SUNY ESF. This is also a hypothetical question. So we focused our conversations mostly on credit-bearing programs, but some of us also work on the non-credit side. So I'm curious about the definition of a student.
FERPA actually covers continuing ed. They are a student.
Thank you.
If they're
Credit versus non-credit.
enrolled, regardless of credit bearing status, then they would be considered a student under FERPA.
And I'll just go one step further there. If your campus does not define CEUs in your FERPA annual notification, you should. Especially as we're all mounting micro credentials and certificates, that's a good practice.
Yeah, and we've talked at other sessions during this conference, right, about the increase in potential for non-credit programs. So I think that's great advice. Thank you. Thanks for that question, Katrina. Go ahead, okay, Brendan, and then we'll go to the virtual.
So circling back a little bit to the merged courses, but more about how we think about what a class is and how we're able to manage sort of allocation of space on a campus with our student information system, where we have a large lecture course that has the lab section. That lab is incorporated into one course. But in order for the scheduling of that course on campus to manage like different time schedules of labs, or you could think about this even if there was like recitation session that's required for a class, for the management of the purposes, we've set things up, and when students register, they're registering so that we know there's a certain amount of space in a particular physical location where there's a common lecture that everybody is part of. It's one instructor, it's the same instructor for all of those. And for the intents and purposes, it's just one class, but we need to manage this separately or in a different way in our student information system, because we're putting all of those students together and considering them a single class, but we're managing it as different course sections.
Karen, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can take that. I'm not sure what campus you're on. Could you repeat that?
No.
No? Okay. All right. I only asked
ESF.
Banner versus PeopleSoft.
ESF.
Okay, so I can speak on my side because we're a PeopleSoft campus, and I'm sure it's very similar in Banner. Those classes, when we have the large lecture portion and discussions, recitations, or labs, we attach them. So you still have to enroll in the large section, and you enroll in the lab. So everyone is enrolled in that large section. So it's okay for them to be together. And only we might have 20 labs, 20 bio labs that attach to that class. And each one of those 20 labs also has its own section number. So I would not potentially be in the same lab as Adam and Scott. I could potentially be I would have to be in the larger classroom, the lecture discussion.
Yeah.
So it varies a little bit from the previous example of 6 sections of psych, because I didn't register for that 5th section of psych. I only registered for the 1st section of psych.
And let me just twist the scenario a little bit. That's like a lawyer hypotheticals. So if you have a course where it's just a lecture and you just have a professor providing information, there's nothing FERPA anything about that. Okay, so you have to realize and kind of make sure that everyone's on the same page without potential PII. But just remember, like, we're only dealing with education records here. Those education records only attach when there's something that might identify a particular student. So if you're recording an asynchronous class and it's just you kind of in front of the camera, there's nothing FERPA connected about that.
That's great clarification. Yeah. Do we have a virtual question? Yeah.
I know we're short on time, past time. There's a number of very sort of specific questions in the chat. So just in general, what's the best resource for someone to go to answer those specific questions, to get that sort of guidance?
So as Karen mentioned, I mean, so at the SUNY campuses, I can only speak for those. We always, unless told otherwise, we treat the registrar as what I would call the FERPA officer. And so they're sort of your first connection point, and they have a wealth of knowledge, as you can hear from Karen. I also go to Karen when I have very specific questions. She's very knowledgeable, but I would say the same thing for your particular campuses, unless for somebody else got identified as the FERPA person. And then they usually, as Karen mentioned, will reach out to either their campus council or our council, it's system administration, to be able to support if there's legal interpretation that's required as part of those questions. Does that answer the specifics?
You probably can't see this, but we all have a ACRO FERPA guide. I probably can't get it close enough. Nope, sorry, it's not working. But we all have an ACRO FERPA guide, which was published last in 2012, which was right after the last reg in 2011. So I'm expecting, as Adam and Scott said, once the new rules and regulations come out, we'll have access to another one. But again, ask. It's better than ask. It's better that you ask than to do something and then be sorry about it later on. And like Adam said, that conversation goes both ways. I talk with my attorney all the time. We've brought Adam in on some things as well. So we just want to make sure that it's not that we want to find the loopholes in FERPA. We want to find ways for you to do your business the way you need to do it that's FERPA compliant. And so we will help find you a solution.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. I know that we're at time, so I want to just make a couple of comments. I think that Karen offered to provide some great, it sounded like FAQs. I don't know if that's what you called them, Karen, but some resources that we can share, which we can absolutely do that. I also want to say that if it's helpful to do a follow-up session for the SUNY folks around this, if there are additional questions that we didn't get to that you want to bring forward, we can always do that. So, happy to schedule a follow-up session. I'm seeing yes, please follow up in the chat, and people are nodding. So Dan, we'll commit to doing that. And like how I did that. And anybody who says I haven't learned how to delegate, did you just see that?
I thought we solved all the issues.
I thought we solved all the issues. I want to just, did somebody want to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I want to apologize for Kim to saying that she hates FERPA, because that's not true. I was just cracking a joke. She actually asked a lot of really intelligent questions about how does this work and how do we make this compliant? So I don't want anyone to think that she is not compliant by any means. The second thing I wanted to say is that for those of you at SUNY schools, if you don't know who to contact in our office for some reason, we do have a general box. It's general.counsel@suny.edu.
Awesome.
And if we can answer the question, we will, or we'll refer you to your campus counsel. So don't ever feel like you don't have support. We certainly will connect you to the right people. So I just wanted to make sure that was out there as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. And I think, whenever we do something significant like we're doing with the DLE, something like FERPA, which maybe you didn't think about as much or have to think about, becomes questions. And I think, as we heard from our panel today, a lot of these things have come up previously and we have answers for them, but there certainly are new scenarios that we're dealing with as well that we want to try to help everybody work through. So I want to just say a very big thank you to Scott and Adam and Karen for coming together. When we were talking about this panel, the question was, well, who's going to moderate this? And I think none of us felt like we knew enough about this to do it. I said, of the folks involved in this, I know the least about FERPA, but I feel very well supported with our team here at SUNY, with our campus registrars, and really appreciate the panel coming together today. So thank you all for joining us today, for the great questions, and more to come for sure. Yeah. Alex, do you want to say some comments to wrap up?
We will also stay up here if you want to come and ask us individual questions, just so we're,
Thanks very much, everyone. I am So we still need to keep, yeah. So I just want to say thank you to everyone, the virtual audience, our virtual moderators. It takes a village to put on a production like this. And I really want to thank all of the folks who have been involved along the way with the presenters, the panelists, the moderators, the CPD, our photographer, the staff. I just want to thank everyone for contributing. You all who attended, our virtual attendees. It's been an amazing 3 days, back face to face and hybrid. It's been an incredible experience. I just want to thank everyone for that. Someone was asking about the slides and the recordings and the resources. If you go to the Summit website, there's a tab that says recordings, and on that tab, you will find all of the presentations. I have almost all the slides posted already. Scott's links are already posted there. I'll get Karen's for this session, her resources posted as soon as I can. The recordings will be posted as soon as I get them. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that the recordings and the materials and the links, all of that will be under that recordings tab on the Summit website. You will be getting a survey to help us understand your experience for both the virtual attendees and the physical attendees. So please help us to understand how to improve this, and what, that'll go into our planning for next year. Typically we alternate between Syracuse and New York City. Last time we were all together was March 2020 in New York City. So next year, technically, it might be New York City. So we're looking for feedback and input on all of that. So again, thank you to all of our presenters and to all of you for helping to make this an incredible SUNY Online Summit 2023. Really appreciate everyone's time, attention, and contributions. Thank you very much.